Howdy there. How the hell's it going, folks? Happy Sunday. All you that'll listen tomorrow, happy Monday. Uh kind of had a little bit of a rambler today. I tried to record it a horseback, but my equipment was not working with me today. So it's good a time to do it as any, I suppose. Before we get too far into it, I'm going to talk just a little bit about a little bit over the year that I've been doing this. Been kind of crazy. So before I do that, though, got some sponsors that help keep this thing going. George, you hear him every week. Good buddy of mine. Owns a beautiful little place called Loma Livestock there in Western Colorado. It's a bi-weekly sale right now during the summer months, going back to a weekly sale in the fall. But next Friday, 10 a.m. Mountain, there at 1369 12 and a half road, you can watch some cattle. Some of the best cattle on earth sell. You can see that starting at 10 o'clock with the cows and singles, followed by the feeders right around 11. If you can't make it to the sale, you can just rest easy knowing that you can go right over to dvauction.com, click on the Loma Livestock tab, and you can watch them sell right there, and you can also bid. And got any other questions for them, just give them a holler, 970-858-9988. Check them out on their website, lomalivestock.com. Thanks, George. And also we got Nick Allen Lute, good buddy of mine, new buddy of mine, but he's got a little rawhide braiding business, saddle repair, and he makes braided rawhide Hondas. They're the best in the game. I like them a lot. I use them. Every rope I have right now has one on them, and they're sure nice. Add a lot of speed, a lot of weight, help you throw some bigger, fancier loops, and they're just tougher than hell. They don't break. Broke the knot on my rope several times, but never have broke a Honda. And even if I did, I just send it back. He'd build me a new one because he's that type of guy. So anyhow, you can shoot him a message on Facebook, Nick Allen Lute, Lute, or at Will Cowboy for Food on Instagram. He'll get you set up. Tell him heard about it on Burning Daylight. He'll cut you a little deal because that's the type of guy he is. So anyway, thanks, Nick. And thank you all for tuning in. Appreciate it. Got quite a few people listening. Kind of a busy night. Nothing else better going on in the world, I suppose. Anyhow, we are just over a year. Burning Daylight. Giving content to the working cowboy for over 1 year. I can officially say that now. It's been a wild ride. Been a lot of fun. Met some really, really cool people. Had some good people sponsor this show, make me some cool stuff, help keep this thing going, and yeah, it's been pretty awesome. I looked at my numbers the other day, and I was at just over 41 or 42,000 total downloads, which is insane. You guys, Tanner, thanks for the anniversary wishes. Yeah, you guys have really downloaded my stuff a lot, so that's pretty cool. Now we've got 10,000 plus followers on Facebook, which is insane. I got about 1,100 on Instagram, and yeah, it just shows me that there's a lot of people that kind of think the way that I do, and that's reassuring. I think could be devastating. I don't know. I'm kind of a weird guy, so hard to tell. Anyways, I guess to kind of celebrate, I'm gonna dive in to a little bit of conspiracy theory stuff. I know that the social media companies try to crack down on conspiracy theory stuff because it's dangerous or something or other, but hopefully they don't cut me off. So I want to talk to you a little bit about simulation theory. I have never been a big proponent of it until just here recently. And frankly, that's the only way I can explain what the hell we've got going on in this crazy world. So take you through a little trip on how I started this deal and the events leading up to today that have me convinced that we are, in fact, living in a simulation. And for those of you who are not familiar with simulation theory, you're the smart ones out there, because it's a deep rabbit hole. So I've heard, not really delved into it too much, but I know the gist of it. And that's really all I need. So if you ever seen the movie The Matrix, basically the idea is that humans are living in a virtual reality when in fact they're basically just a power source for the robot overlords or something like that. It's been a long time since I've seen the movie, but basically humans are slave to like the mechanical computerized overlords, and they use them as a power source, and they put them on this virtual reality deal. And so everything they see in front of them just looks like a regular old normal life, but it's all fake. And if you look at the events of the last year that I've been doing this, it starts to make a lot of sense that we are in fact living in a simulation. So starting off June 10th, I did the inaugural episode of Burning Daylight, Cowboys versus Buckaroos. And from a bunch of coaxing from my wife and a lot of thought and pondering, and then eventually just saying, fuck it, why not? I recorded an episode on horseback with my phone and a pair of earbuds. And that episode's been downloaded close to 1,000 times now, and that's wild to me. And now, as I said before, I've got 42,000 total downloads. I think this will be episode 187. So the way I figured it out the other day was it was right about 220 downloads per episode average. So to put that in a nutshell, that means I've got right around 220 regular listeners. And that's wild. That's a pretty packed bar listening to what I have to say. And that doesn't seem real, to tell you the truth. Then you add the 10,500 and some followers on Facebook. That can't be real, I don't think. 1,100 people on Instagram. That just doesn't seem real. It would make more sense in my head that this is just a virtual reality simulation. So there's point one for the case that we are indeed living in a simulation. Point two being, as I started going along and recording a few more episodes, I started delving into politics, which, as anybody who knows me by now knows, that I'm very fascinated by it, very interested in it. And little did I know, apparently there was a lot of other people that liked hearing what I had to say and my take on things, because the episodes where I talked politics did really well. And so started doing that. And as I'm covering some of the current events, we had, if you remember way back in the ether of a year ago, we had a Democratic primary going on with roughly 32 million candidates running at the same time and on the stage for a debate at the same time. Ballpark figure of 32 million. And you had every shape and size. You had the crusty old Jewish socialist, Bernie Sanders, all the way down to little like kind of fish-looking guy, Julian Castro, and his fake Mexican counterpart, also from Texas, Robert Francis O'Rourke, who calls himself Beto. And I'll have to read that in a minute, Jackson. Yeah, so you had a real Mexican who kind of looked like a fish, and then you had a fake Mexican who called himself Beto, but he was as pasty white Irish as it gets. He was also like supposed to be like a cool hip skateboard guy or something. And he was supposed to be like the white Obama, and he fizzled out. He was actually going to enforce a mandatory buyback of assault weapons. As you can tell, that went over real well. He got shushed out. We had my favorite politician of the last 15 years, at least, if not ever, in the great Native American hope, Elizabeth Warren, old Lizzie Paleface. I don't see why more people didn't vote for her. I just don't understand. The world was not ready for a warrior like old Lizzie Paleface, and so she faded by the wayside. You had a black woman, you had a black guy. I think I'm blacker than Cory Booker though, and because I think I know like 5 or 6 black people probably, at least. Way up there for a white dude. And I probably know more black people than than Cory Booker, but he's definitely a black guy. So he fizzled out. You had Tulsi Gabbard, kind of a foxy little Hawaiian lady, who was hated by everybody else on stage because she was anti-war, but she made a little fuss, but faded away, and then traded in all of her street cred with any libertarians by endorsing Joe Biden, who is the left side of the aisle version of John McCain. There's not a war out there that he hasn't been in favor of. So she threw away any street credit there. And so the party of social justice, identity politics, super woke lefty Democrats, they stumbled and fumbled their way through all 320 million candidates that they had put forward, and they found their ringer in a senile old white straight dude who's been in politics his entire adult life to be the great savior of the party of woke leftyism. It doesn't seem real that Joe Biden, who can't string together 2 thoughts, let alone 2 sentences, without falling apart, who cannot stop touching little kids inappropriately, has a weird deal with sniffing people's hair, and told the black community that they were indeed not black if they had a second thought about voting for Donald Trump over Joe Biden. That guy is the now candidate for presidency for the Democratic Party. That cannot be real. This has to be a simulation. So, then moving right along, we have a crisis like I've never seen before in the cattle markets. Kind of kicked off with the Holcomb, Kansas Tyson plant fire last summer, and huge call for investigations and big outcry from cattle producers all across the country. The Western Ag Reporter started this online campaign to draw attention to the cattle markets, and put Donald Trump on notice that ranchers were pissed off. And so they started the hashtag Fair Cattle Markets deal. And I had several recommendations and requests to cover this. So I delve into it, and I end up having Corbett Wall, who is highly regarded as one of the top market analysts in the country, on the show. Bullshitted with him for about an hour. little over an hour, had a great conversation. That doesn't seem real. And then I rolled right into Bill Bullard, the CEO of RCAF USA, well-known figure in the cattle business. Loved on one side, hated on another side, and a lot of people with torn feelings about him. But regardless of all of that, he's well known. People know who he is and they know where he stands. Got to talk to that guy for about an hour. Doesn't seem real. Same thing with a higher up for National Cattlemen's Beef Association, John Robinson. He was the vice president of something or other. I don't know. He wasn't the main boss, but he was the lower boss. Still pretty high up. Same thing. Visited with him for about an hour. Had a good conversation. That all doesn't seem real. And then I talked to Leah Biondo, who is spokeswoman, lobbyist for United States Cattlemen's Association. Same thing. Got to talk with her for about an hour. Those are the three major trade associations in the cattle business right now. And I talked to people with all of them. And that doesn't seem real. They all willingly came on and spent about an hour on this shit show of a podcast that I've created, and had pretty meaningful conversations. There was some good answers, well thought out, pretty profound answers from all three of them. And then there was also a whole lot of political nonsense. And by political nonsense, I mean they said a bunch of big flowery words, said it with a lot of emotion, and it sounded really nice. And then when they got done talking, mull it over, you realize they really said absolutely nothing. So there was a lot of that. And all three of those episodes did really well. Had several hundred downloads. And then I did a rebuttal to RCAF and NCBA, because didn't get a chance to talk with Leah from USCA until after I had recorded this one. But I did a rebuttal telling what I thought about trade associations and how basically they are the same thing as the labor movement. They had a purpose back in the day, but they've become bloated, they've become corrupt, and they're, I think, possibly pricing us out of the domestic beef market. I'm not totally for sure on that, but I think that could be one of the main things, or one of a major reason for some of the strife that we have today in the cattle market. But all of that's being said, my rebuttal episode got better numbers than all four of those people. Torbett Wall, Bill Bullard, John Robinson, and Leah Biondo, all people that are far more well-known than myself, have a lot more respect and a following than myself. And you folks decided that you wanted to hear what I had to say more than what they had to say. And that's a pretty humbling fact. And therefore, it can't be real. We are living in a simulation. There's no way that there's no way that I held more people's attention than those four. We are living in a simulation. Then we move along, and we have a Sober October challenge. Stupid Robbie, Robbie, if you're listening, you can eat a dick. We went sober. I went sober. Sam, I think, went sober. And we're supposed to run 31 mile or a mile a day. Robbie knocked his out in about 2 weeks and then started drinking immediately afterwards. Thaddeus. I think he ran 2 miles and then immediately started drinking afterwards, and then went radio silent for the rest of the month, basically. And so that might be the most believable part of this year so far, is that 2 out of the 4 of us actually made it through a full month of being sober. I love when everybody's talking shit on Robbie. That also ranks up there with my highest accomplishments so far. All right, so then we finish up Sober October, and things are kind of winding down for the year. And I did a year-end episode where I said, if you thought 2019 was crazy, buckle up, because I think 2020 is going to be a real doozy. And holy fuck, I was not wrong, but I had no idea what was coming. I thought the left-wing folks were going to get crazy, and you'd see a whole lot of crazy stunts legislatively. But man, 2020 started off strong, let's say. Shortly after the first of the year, Donald Trump assassinates the top military official of Iran and on Iraqi soil, causes a global uproar. We were on the brink of World War III, it seemed like. And boy, it's tough to top that one, you'd think. And luckily, cooler heads prevailed, and Donald Trump spoke his magic or whatever and talked us back off the brink. And we still got some major issues over there, but you know, for right now, the nukes were lowered, and no World War III. So then February rolls around, and the impeachment is in full swing, and the House goes ahead and votes to impeach Donald Trump for obstruction of Congress and abuse of power. Pretty well passed on a party line vote. I can't recall if any of the Republicans voted against him. Maybe Amash, I'm not for sure. And then you had 2 Democrats vote against impeachment, and then Tulsi Gabbard voted present. Anyway, all Democratic votes basically pass the House, goes to the Senate, and he's acquitted and receives the highest poll approval rate of his presidency directly after he is acquitted of his crimes in the Senate. And it looked like the Democrats have nowhere to go with this whole deal. They blew their wad. It was ineffective. It was a dud. And where do you go from there? Trump pretty well holds all the political power right now. And then comes March roaring in, and we got the Rona. Worldwide pandemic, shut down everything, tank the economy to save your grandma. And we got essential workers out there keeping this country moving, and we got the non-essentials at home watching Netflix. And then to ease the pain a little bit, you know, while everybody is shut down, you know, state by state, just one after another, I think there's 2 or 3 states that didn't really shut down, like Wyoming and South Dakota. But basically everyone shuts down except for non-essential businesses, deemed by, who knows, a bunch of different people, deemed who was essential and who was non-essential. But to ease the pain, Netflix drops a masterpiece of a series called The Tiger King. And we are all delighted by this gay, gun-packing redneck who owns a bunch of tigers and really likes younger straight dudes that are into meth. And it's just a glorious presentation of life in Wynnewood, Oklahoma. And we learn about the ultimate supervillain, possibly more evil than Hillary Clinton in that bitch, Carol Baskin. And, you know, it was a good time to release that. Everybody is at home, and it was just magic. And sadly, that is the most normal part of 2020 so far is Joe Exotic. So yeah, tip of the hat to Joe Exotic for all the laughs and the intrigue, and for a mutual enemy of the American people, that bitch Carol Baskin. But you look at all that, and you think if I would have told you this on June 10th, 2019, on the first episode, that we would be slowly rolling out of a pandemic, that Trump had almost got us into World War III, and I had talked to representatives on the podcast from the three major cattle trade associations, you would say, fuck you, you are full of shit. That'll never happen. And you might be right, because I don't think it actually happened, because we're living in a goddamn simulation, because none of this stuff can be real. There's no way this shit is really happening. And then we got April, was fairly quiet, I suppose. We had the murder hornets, which came and went. Nothing really happened there. And then we had a whole bunch of bickering back and forth about the proper way to handle a pandemic, and who needed to be shut down, and for how long they needed to be shut down, and blah, 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 blah. We had protests that were demonized for people. They showed up, particularly in Michigan. They showed up armed at the state capitol. And Michigan had one of the most draconian shutdown orders in the entire country. So you had a bunch of people that were sick and tired of it, and they wanted to go back to work. They protested, and they were almost unanimously villainized and demonized, or vilified and demonized by the mainstream media. And they were placing money over the life of Granny, and then they wanted to get their hair cut, and because of that, Granny was going to die. And but other than that, April was fairly uneventful, I guess. And then here comes May, and the George Floyd situation. We have a black fella on video getting his neck crushed for 9 minutes. As you would expect, protests pop up, protests turn violent, looting starts. They burnt a police precinct. But they got this guy charged for murder quicker than it's ever happened in the state of Minnesota, so that's a good thing. They got his fellow officers charged. I forget, accessory to something. I forget what their exact charges are, but they probably should have been charged. And so they got that. So that was good. But in the meantime, thousands of businesses were ruined and smashed up and vandalized and looted, and this happened all over the country. And it was starting to look like, man, we are going to have some real change here. And the Democrats in the Senate, being the brave warriors they are, having the real power to change something, in qualified immunity for police, so that if they're, in this bad apple theory that everybody talks about, I can buy into that. But if there is no accountability for the bad apples, then the process continues. So if you get rid of qualified immunity, a real change in how police work is done, when you can be sued and criminally charged for your wrongdoings as a cop, maybe you'll change your tactics. Well, could have got that done, but Democrats had one thing better. They could one up that. They can all don a bunch of West African scarves and hats and take a knee for 9 minutes in a show of solidarity, and instead of pushing forward any sort of criminal justice reform and any sort of measures to combat police brutality. No, but they took a knee in a show of solidarity, and they had African tribal gear to boot. I hope you feel better, black folks. They really went out on a limb for you there. And you would think that this could be the scene from a bad movie, But there's no way this would happen in real life. Well, guess what? It's because it didn't, because it's not real, because we're living in a simulation. None of this is real. And now you have Seattle. 6 or 7 blocks of downtown Seattle has been occupied by Antifa and Black Lives Matter and far left protesters and left-wing anarchists and whatever. They have pretty well declared themselves autonomous. And actually, they called it the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, or CHAZ for short. And I was listening to the Part of the Problem podcast today, and Dave Smith, the guy that on there, he summed it up pretty good, where you have a bunch of left-wing activists who are, like super woke, racial equality, gender equality, sexual orientation equality, and they name their new territory after what would be like a wealthy, privileged white gay dude. And don't take it wrong, Chaz Johnson, I'll be officiating his wedding here in a couple months, so don't take it wrong. I just thought that was a pretty funny comparison. And so they take it over and they institute this like communist society kind of. Well, within 3 days they ran out of food, and they have a SoundCloud rapper who has declared himself the warlord, or maybe that's his artist name. I don't know, but he's like the warlord of CHAZ, and he's a SoundCloud rapper. And they the first thing they did when they occupied this police precinct in this 6-7 block area is they, the party the party and movement that has fought Donald Trump and his border wall every step of the way immediately set up barriers and restricted the entry into CHAZ. And then they also, in an incredible statement of irony from, I don't know if it was the Seattle police chief or like vice chief or deputy chief or something like that, but someone high up in the Seattle Police Department said there has been complaints of extortion from these leaders in the CHAZ occupied zone of going to the businesses and asking for money in return for protection, which is what the government does through the IRS every year. But when it's a private citizen doing it, it's extortion. It's amazing. Anyway, so they're immediately collecting taxes, and they're apparently trying to farm there too. But I didn't get to watch the video, but Nick Lute was telling me about how they laid out cardboard. They dumped a bunch of potting soil on it, and then they set their plants on top of the potting soil. But they didn't plant them. They left them in the pot on top of the potting soil, which was on top of the cardboard. So I think they're probably set. They have hit self-sufficient status by now. I'm sure they'll have a thriving economy for years to come. And all of this is going down, and then you got nationwide protests. You've got these you've got white guilt just dripping out of every pore of a lot of people nowadays. You have police officers kneeling before Black Lives Matter protesters. You have them washing their feet. You have the entire Democratic caucus in Congress wearing African tribal garb and taking a knee. And you have a new independent state of CHAZ, the People's Republic of CHAZ, within downtown Seattle. And if I would have told you this was going to happen a year ago on June 10th, when I recorded my first episode, you would not have believed me, and I wouldn't have believed myself. I would have told you I think I am on a mushroom trip, because this can't be real. And I still think it can't be real. We are living in a simulation, folks. I don't know where it's going, but I guess just hold on to your virtual reality headsets, because I think it's just going to get wilder from here. I don't know what we were asking. We were talking in our Snap group today about this CHAZ deal, and I really feel for those people that had businesses within that area. If they're not on board with this new autonomous zone, it really sucks for them. But for everybody else that's participating in it, I'm kind of interested to see how it plays out. My gut reaction is just let them be, because if that's how they're going to farm, and I don't know how many people they have living there. I don't know what if they're going to be using U.S. currency for trade, or if they're going back to the barter system or what. But I imagine this thing's probably going to fizzle out. It'll probably get violent once the people of Seattle get tired of it, and they send in the cops and their biggest goons to just start clearing people out. I imagine it's going to get a little violent. But I don't know. I'm kind of, I would say just leave them be and see how long they can last. You're making a stand. Let's see how long it works. I don't know. Man, it's getting crazy out there. And the biggest part about it is, so I don't know if what we're watching is real or not, is here I am in rural Western Nevada, and I talk to people every week from rural parts of the country, whether it be Dakota down in New Mexico, or Jesse up in Montana, or then Robbie and Nick over in Kansas. Like, our lives have not changed a whole hell of a lot since since the COVID and since the protests, really. All I see is pictures and videos from bigger cities, and I don't know what to think of it. I guess there was a protest in Fallon the other day, which is about an hour from here, hour and a half. And Fallon has a large naval air base. A lot of military members stationed there. And apparently there's a gal from New York originally that's stationed at Fallon Naval Air Base. And she organized a Black Lives Matter protest in Fallon. And patchouli oil is worth its weight in gold, Brett Stanley. I'll have you know. I'm not sure what it's worth up in Canada, but patchouli oil would be good barter material if you're going to be venturing into the CHAZ. Patchouli oil. I don't even know what patchouli is. Where was I headed? Oh, I lost my train of thought there, Brett. God damn it. But yeah, I don't know where they're going with this, and I don't see it lasting very long. But Fallon, they organized this protest, and so they start marching, and then a bunch of 2A advocates show up as a counter protest, and so they're chanting back and forth at each other. You got Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter, and then somebody from the Black Lives Matter group, clan, whatever, they cross the street and they start talking with one of the 2A protesters, and next thing you know, they're shaking hands, they're hugging it out, and then everybody starts crossing the street, and they start hugging it out, and next thing you know, they're all chanting amongst themselves, and they're grilling hot dogs and hamburgers and having a good old time. And 3 jackasses walk around the corner with pointy white hoods and immediately get turned on by the entire crowd. Black Lives Matter and 2A advocates all together chased them off the scene. No violence was done. And I think it was pretty obvious. I was telling my wife that pretty obvious they weren't actual Klan members, or they would have stood their ground, and it might have got violent. But these guys were trolling, trying to go viral or something, and apparently it backfired pretty good for him. So good for the people of Fallon and the folks there stationed at the Naval Air Base. That's pretty cool. I'd like to see a lot more of that. And I think if you look at people who are, you follow people who are actually on the ground during those things, for the most part, these things are peaceful protests. There's always a bunch of shitheads that get out of hand. And the cops, they're the reason that these protests started. And they get harped on a lot. They catch a lot of shit. Some of it is justified, some of it's not. But then they get in a point where they either have stand down orders or they just don't want to risk it. And I can't blame them. So shit spirals out of control. And at that point, it's got to come down on the group of protesters that started it. They're trying to be peaceful to start policing their own protest. And you've seen a lot of that. If you care to look for it, it's not going to be shown a lot by the mainstream media because that's not what drives ratings and gets all the clicks and whatever. Anger, fear, and resentment is what drives ratings for all these media companies. So a good heartfelt story, it might get shared around a bunch, but it's not going to drive the consistent number of clicks and the ratings if everybody's pissed off at each other. So you kind of got to dig deep, but you can find it. And I think, as I said since the beginning, if people would just talk to each other and listen, you find out you got a lot more in common. One of the things I've said many a times is if only the Finnecums and the Bundys and the militia members that were up at the Malheur Wildlife Refuge, if they could have linked arms with Black Lives Matter and had a united front against government overreach and police brutality, and came out as the people taking a stand against the government, it would have made a big difference. It would have been almost an unstoppable force, but it didn't happen. And instead we're just at each other's throats. Brian, the ratings, care to explain ratings? And then Tucker Carlson losing all advertisers despite top ratings. Well, I was listening to a good piece today and I agree with it a lot. So the culture aspect of the country, whether it be media, Hollywood, the music industry is pretty well dominated by left-wing folks, and culture dominates advertising. And so if left-wing people dominate the media, they dominate that advertising. And Tucker Carlson does have very good ratings because he's a pretty honest journalist, or at least opinion pundit, but he's pretty honest, and and he's a pretty good platform, I would say, but he speaks out against the far left quite a bit, and he's not very politically correct, and that any big corporate culture, as anybody who's ever worked in a corporate climate knows, everything is very PC. Very sterilized, watered down. You can't have any real opinions, and there's always the biggest backlash from the left wing side on culture issues, and that's why he's losing all of the advertisers, despite having good ratings. It's because there's a huge left wing backlash, and they may not be huge in numbers, but they make a lot of noise. And they drive the culture. So that's what I think on the ratings and just ratings in general. If you see a headline that makes you pissed off immediately, you're probably going to click on it. And as opposed to just a fair and even keeled headline, you're going to click on the one that pisses you off. So as far as like print journalists, you know, like nobody buys a physical newspaper anymore. It's all online. And so they have to sell ads. So they have to get clicks. And so that's where you get these, you know, it's called clickbait. It's they bait you to click on it. And then, you know, they'll tell you the truth way down the article. Let me find these screenshots real quick. Okay, so the headline was some states hit pause, others press on amid spike in virus. And it talks about how after these you know, some states are starting to reopen, and then we have these nationwide protests. We're seeing a spike in COVID-19 cases. And it goes on down, and if you scroll all the way down to the 11th paragraph, it says cases are rising as the state expands testing, but health officials say key metrics to watch are the positivity rate among those tested and hospitalizations. Both have remained relatively steady in recent weeks. As businesses gradually reopen, the state has guardrails and cautions in place that give officials confidence to continue reopening, says, I forget, I think this was Texas maybe. Anyway, the state's Health and Human Services Secretary says that. But that's the 11th paragraph that you have to read to before you get to what could be summed up. This whole story could be summed up in that one paragraph, that these states are testing more, therefore your positive rate has gone up, but your overall hospitalizations and death, the mortality rate has stayed steady or gone down. And yeah, most people don't read down that far. It's not a particularly interesting piece, and you know, it's kind of a bland, dry piece, and most people are gonna tune out right well before they get to paragraph 11. But paragraph 11, way down towards the bottom third of the article, that is where all the relevant information really was. The rest of it was just fluff and fear mongering, and that's just how the media works. But I still present to you the case that if I would have told you everything I just told you 1 year ago on the first episode of this podcast, I wouldn't have believed it. You wouldn't have believed it. Nobody in their right mind would have ever believed the shit that has happened since then has happened. And therefore, I contend that it didn't happen, because we are, in fact, living in a simulation. And I just can't wait to see what comes up next. It's going to be a doozy. So anyhow, that's all I got for you tonight. Appreciate y'all tuning in. I appreciate you sticking around with me for over 1 year. And it's been pretty cool. We got a lot more stuff coming your way. Got a lot of cool stuff planned for this year. Hopefully it all comes together. I think it will. We've got some t-shirts on the way. They'll be printed here in the next week or so, hopefully. And there's a short batch going out. I think we've got about 10 of each size that we ordered. And as soon as they're in, I will post them, and first come, first serve. And we'll maybe do another run later. But we got a couple more ideas. We got a lot of stuff coming your way. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks to my sponsors, Loma Livestock and Nick Lute, and all the previous sponsors that have helped me out, you know, whether it be Josh over at Don't Be a Gunsel, or Chase down there in Alabama with Rock and G Cutlery, or Chris Fogwell, who has some items for sale on the website. If you like good leather gear, check them out. I've got a few up there, and yeah, they've been so kind to support the show, and it's been awesome. I've met a lot of really cool people, gained some new good buddies, good friends from all over Montana, Alabama, Vermont. Kate was kind of a that was kind of a hidden gem. She's a cool chick. I like talking to her. I know everybody else does too. And that was kind of just a random acquaintance on Instagram, and she's turned into a good friend. And I kind of value what she has to say. She offers a different perspective on agriculture, being back farming back east, and it's been neat meeting all you folks. And yes, Eddie DeRoca, Chazistan forever, or until they run out of food again. The Communist Society is posting a list of needs to be donated from their capitalist neighbors, which sounds about right. Long live the People's Republic of CHAZ. And thanks all for tuning in. Go follow me. If you're watching here, you know where to find me on Facebook. At MickerMac85 is my personal stuff on Twitter, Instagram. At Move Your Ass for the show page. Make sure you go check out the website. We're going to be building that into something cool. Be a one-stop shop for cowboy entertainment. As soon as we get that all lined out. But go check it out, burning-daylight.com. You can find all the podcast links there as well, as a whole bunch of memes. So thanks again for tuning in. Appreciate y'all. Be safe out there, and move your ass. We're burning daylight.